One of the absolutely most frustrating areas of CSS when it comes to design is understanding how conflicts are resolved. When you have large or complex websites, or if you're using multiple style sheets to achieve a various result, certain conflicts can arise. And when those conflicts do arise, solving them is part of CSS's complexity. That has to do with the cascade and something called specificity. So we have to take a look at some of these technical issues in order to gain better mastery over our documents. Many times I've found myself sitting there trying to make a paragraph turn a different color, and it won't do it, and it won't do it, and I'd validate against the validator, and my syntax is great, and I wouldn't be able to figure out why on earth my style was not applying. And my tendency was always to go, oh, darn, it's the CSS, or oh, darn, this stupid browser. It's not me. Everything's right. When in fact, there is so much complexity in the way that these conflicts are resolved that without knowing exactly how this works, we are not empowered to solve those conflicts and know where to look for them in the first place. So in this particular movie, I'm going to talk to you about origin and source order. Origin is the issue of where the style comes from. In other words, if you have multiple style sheets related to a given document, the cascade in the browser, the way that the browsers interpret cascade, are going to look for that origin and apply rules in accordance with the origin. There's also source order, in other words, where the rule falls in the source. That is going to make a difference. So we're going to go ahead and build up some rules that make actual conflicts and then see how they're resolved. So all of these files are available to you in Chapter 4. And I've created some snippets for those of you using Dreamweaver. Otherwise, please follow along with the information that is available in the source files. So let's go ahead. And the first thing I want to do is I want to attach a style sheet to this to give it a very basic style. And I'm going to go ahead and add the origin.css. And as you can see here, all I've done is I've created a very simple rule for paragraphs. And I've given them a 2-pixel solid border of a purple color. And then I've given a text color of green. So if we go back to our HTML document and I drop in the link style for origin.css, save my work. Let's take a look at this in Firefox and see what happens. Okay, there we have it. All the paragraphs on the page are styled with a 2-pixel solid purple border and the text is green. No conflicts, everything's working. Let's groovy on over to Dreamweaver and add another linked style sheet above that. In this case, I've added order.css. Let's take a look at that. And I've created a conflict, color blue. So my origin style sheet says color green. And my order style sheet says color blue. And both of these are attached to this particular document. So I'm going to save my document. We're going to cartwheel on over to Firefox, do a refresh, and nothing happens. That's because the conflict has not been resolved successfully. So let's go back on over to Dreamweaver. And I'm going to show you how source order in this particular case is how to resolve this conflict. Okay, let's go ahead and cut this, and then I'm going to put it below the other link. I'm going to save my file. I'm going to hop back into Firefox, reload, and guess what? Now my text is turned blue. If we look at the source code in Dreamweaver, we see that it is the last link that will take precedence. So in other words, some people like to think about this, that the rule closest to the content is what wins. So when this order was above the origin, it would appear, that rule was appearing earlier in the context of this application hierarchy. And now it's been switched to later, and therefore it becomes the rule that gets applied. So let's go ahead. I'm going to, for purposes of clarity, I'm going to remove this particular example, save my file, and I'm going to show you a couple of other source and origin related conflicts that we can resolve. Let's go ahead and drop a style for the paragraph into the embedded style area. And here you'll see I've got a background color, and then I've got a foreground color, text color, of a mid-gray. If we save our file, and remember that we're still attached to this origin.css, which has a color of green, and here we have a color of mid-gray. Take a look in our browser, we refresh, and guess what? We pick up the styles from that particular embedded style rule. So here we see that, again, what is occurring later on, what is occurring in terms of relation, what is closer to the actual content is what's winning here, even though these are two different types of style sheets. Okay, and embedded, remember, this is also origin, because embedded always is going to trump the link, unless there's a specificity issue, which I'll be getting to in a couple of movies. Okay, let's go ahead and add a conflict. So here we have another conflict. We have a color that is different from this color, and then of course there is another color here. So all vying for the attention of the paragraph. Flip on over to Firefox, refresh, and as you see, the text color now applies. Because, as we go back into the code view here, this comes later in the source. Okay, but you'll notice where there are no conflicts, the rules keep getting applied. So in this case, the background color got applied because there was no other conflict within the style sheet. But wherever there are conflicts, the source order here has, in fact, been the method by which the browser is figuring out which rule to apply. One final note here is that inline style, as you know, takes precedence over embedded and linked. Let's go ahead and drop an inline style right into that first paragraph. And give it a save. Do some cartwheels on over to Firefox and a reload. And you'll see that, in fact, that particular element gets a background color of gray. If we go back on over to our source code, see that, in fact, this is winning out over this particular rule. And the reason has to do with two things. The first is that inline style is going to simply take precedence in the cascade to embedded style. But a deeper reason, or perhaps more complex reason, has to do with the fact that inline style is considered to be a more specific style than the style that is embedded or linked. And again, I'm going to be talking more about specificity because that is the final way of resolving conflicts. And I'll be doing that later in this chapter. The thing to bear in mind here is that if you have these multiple style sheets, if you have a scenario where there are conflicts, what you need to be doing is thinking about the origin. Okay, where does that style come from? How that relates to the cascade in terms of whether it's inline, trumping embedded, trumping linked, or imported. So you have to make sure that that's all clean. And if it is an order issue within the source, that the rule closest to the content is what is going to win. So when you do run across these conflicts, it is best to try and solve them and then remove any of the rules or the properties and values that you just do not need to use, cleaning up your document and making it less confusing and removing any potential conflicts in the future.